Ladies and gentlemen, today we dive into the life of one of the most controversial figures in American history, Frank, the Irishman Sheeran. A man whose life was marked by war, loyalty, crime, and a web of secrets that still puzzle historians and crime experts. Frank Sheeran's journey into a life of crime didn't begin in the streets. It started on the battlefields of World War II. Born in 1920 in Derby, Pennsylvania, Sheeran was of Irish descent and grew up during the Great Depression, a time when survival often depended on toughness and adaptability. Like many young men of his generation, he was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II, an experience that would shape the rest of his life in unexpected ways. Sheeran served in the 45th Infantry Division, which was heavily involved in some of the most brutal battles in the European theater. He saw intense combat in Italy, France, and Germany, fighting against Nazi forces in grueling conditions. His unit was part of the invasion of Sicily in 1943 and later participated in the liberation of concentration camps. By the time he completed his service, he had fought in more than 400 days of active combat, a staggering number, considering most soldiers only saw a fraction of that. The war taught Sheeran more than just survival. It taught him how to kill without hesitation. In battle, soldiers had to follow orders, eliminate enemies, and move forward without questioning their actions. Sheeran later admitted that during the war, he took part in several executions of enemy prisoners, an experience that made him comfortable with taking lives. This desensitization to violence would play a crucial role in his later years when he became a contract killer for the Mafia. But his military service didn't just teach him how to kill. It also introduced him to the importance of loyalty, hierarchy, and discipline, qualities that would make him a valuable asset to organized crime. In the military, soldiers were expected to obey orders without question, a mindset that the Mafia also demanded from its members. Sheeran's ability to follow orders and his lack of hesitation in carrying out deadly tasks made him a perfect candidate for the life he would soon step into. After returning from the war, Sheeran struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Like many veterans, he found that regular jobs didn't suit him, and he gravitated toward work that mirrored the structure and intensity of his military experience. He became a truck driver, a job that would later introduce him to the criminal underworld. It wasn't long before he found himself in the company of mobsters, men who recognized his potential as an enforcer. The discipline he learned in the military made him a reliable figure, and his war experience proved that he was capable of extreme violence without hesitation. In many ways, Frank Sheeran's time in the Army acted as a training ground for his future role in organized crime. He went from following the orders of military commanders to taking commands from Mafia bosses, and the transition seemed almost seamless. The same skills that had made him an effective soldier, loyalty, obedience, and the ability to kill without remorse, made him an invaluable asset to the underworld. His military background is essential to understanding how he became one of the most feared hitmen of his time. Unlike many gangsters who grew up in crime, Sheeran entered that world as a fully trained killer, already hardened by war. His experience gave him an edge, making him a trusted figure among the Mafia elite, and allowing him to rise quickly in the ranks of organized crime. Frank Sheeran's entry into the world of organized crime was not immediate, but once he was in, he became a highly trusted figure within the Mafia. Unlike many other gangsters who were born into crime, Sheeran's path was different. After returning from World War II, he struggled to adjust to civilian life, working various jobs before settling into truck driving. This job would eventually connect him to the powerful Bufalino crime family, a relationship that would define his life. As a truck driver, Sheeran frequently transported goods across state lines. In the post-war economy, the trucking industry was a critical part of commerce, and labor unions had immense power over transportation and logistics. It was during this time that Sheeran was introduced to Russell Bufalino, the boss of the Bufalino crime family. Unlike the more famous Mafia families of New York, the Bufalinos operated more discreetly, controlling unions, gambling, and extortion operations with quiet efficiency. Russell Bufalino was a man of few words, but he recognized Sheeran's potential. Sheeran's military background made him stand out. He was disciplined, had combat experience, and most importantly, he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He started doing small favors for the crime family, such as delivering packages and handling disputes in ways that often involved force. These tasks slowly introduced him to the underworld, and before long, he was trusted with more serious assignments. One of the key aspects of Sheeran's rise in the mafia was his ability to handle problems without hesitation. In organized crime, loyalty and obedience were valued above all else. Sheeran proved to be someone who could be relied upon to complete assignments without questioning the morality or legality of his actions. He wasn't a traditional mafia soldier. He was of Irish descent and never officially became a made man, since only those of Italian heritage could be formally inducted into the mafia. However, this didn't stop him from gaining immense respect and influence within the organization. Sheeran's work for the Bufalino crime family often involved enforcing their will through intimidation and violence. He became known as someone who could be counted on to carry out hits, assassinations of individuals who had crossed the family or posed a threat. In the mafia world, the ability to kill efficiently and without remorse was a valuable skill, and Sheeran had learned it well during his military service. His reputation grew, and he became one of Bufalino's most trusted associates. One of the key turning points in Sheeran's life was his introduction to Jimmy Hoffa, the powerful leader of the Teamsters Union. Hoffa was deeply connected to the mafia, using their muscle to control labor unions and maintain power. Sheeran was assigned to be Hoffa's bodyguard and enforcer, strengthening his ties to both the union world and the criminal underworld. This relationship with Hoffa would later become one of the most defining aspects of Sheeran's life, leading to both deep loyalty and eventual betrayal. Sheeran's connections in the mafia provided him with wealth, power, and a sense of belonging. He was not just an ordinary criminal. He operated in the upper ranks of organized crime, rubbing shoulders with some of the most powerful figures of his time. However, this life also came with extreme risks. He was constantly under the watch of law enforcement, and in the world of the mafia, loyalty could be a matter of life and death. One wrong move, and he could become the next target. His rise in the mafia world showcased his ability to navigate dangerous alliances, gaining the trust of some of the most ruthless men in history. But with power came responsibility, and eventually, the burden of carrying out one of the most infamous alleged murders in American history. Frank Sheeran's relationship with Jimmy Hoffa was one of the most significant and complex aspects of his life. More than just an association between a union leader and a mafia enforcer, their bond was built on trust, shared interests, and ultimately, betrayal. Hoffa was one of the most powerful men in America during the mid-20th century, controlling the Teamsters Union, which had millions of members and billions of dollars in pension funds. However, his deep connections with organized crime also made him vulnerable. Sheeran became not only his trusted enforcer but also his close friend, a relationship that would define both of their legacies. Hoffa and Sheeran first met in the 1950s, when Russell Bufalino, the boss of the Bufalino crime family, introduced them. Bufalino had a significant interest in the Teamsters Union because of its financial power and ability to control transportation across the country. The mafia used the union's pension fund as a source of funding for various illegal enterprises, including loans to casinos, money laundering, and extortion operations. Hoffa, though not a mafia member himself, understood that in order to maintain control of the Teamsters, he needed the protection and muscle that organized crime could provide. Sheeran, a loyal soldier for the mafia, was assigned to work closely with Hoffa as both a bodyguard and an enforcer. He was responsible for handling disputes, collecting debts, and ensuring that Hoffa's interests were protected. Over time, their relationship deepened, and they developed a genuine friendship. Hoffa trusted Sheeran more than almost anyone, often referring to him as his Irish friend. Sheeran was not just a hired gun. He became a confidant, someone Hoffa could rely on in a world filled with political and criminal enemies. Their bond extended beyond business. Sheeran often visited Hoffa's home, spending time with his family and forming a close connection with his wife and children. Hoffa treated Sheeran like a brother, and the two shared countless meals, conversations, and moments of trust. For Sheeran, this relationship provided a sense of belonging and importance. He was no longer just a mafia hitman. He was the right-hand man to one of the most powerful labor leaders in American history. However, their friendship was not without tension. Hoffa's aggressive leadership style and his desire to regain control of the Teamsters after being imprisoned in the 1960s put him at odds with the Mafia. When Hoffa was released from prison in 1971, he wanted to reclaim his position as Teamsters president, but the Mafia had moved on, installing new leadership that was more cooperative with their interests. Hoffa's refusal to back down created friction with the very people who had once supported him. As Hoffa became more vocal and defiant, warning that he would expose mafia connections within the union, he unknowingly signed his own death warrant. The mafia viewed him as a liability, someone who could no longer be controlled. This put Sheeran in an impossible position. He was caught between his loyalty to Hoffa, his closest friend, and his obligations to the Bufalino crime family, who had made it clear that Hoffa needed to be eliminated. Sheeran later claimed that he tried to warn Hoffa, advising him to step away from the fight and retire peacefully. But Hoffa, known for his stubbornness and refusal to back down, ignored the warnings. He believed he was untouchable, that his influence and connections would protect him. Unfortunately, he underestimated the reach and ruthlessness of the Mafia. The deeper Sheeran's friendship with Hoffa became, the more painful his eventual betrayal would be. The two men, once inseparable, were now on a collision course with fate, one that would lead to one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance on July 30th, 1975, remains one of the most famous and enduring mysteries in American history. At the center of this mystery is Frank Sheeran, the man who claimed to have carried out Hoffa's execution. Whether Sheeran's confession was entirely true or exaggerated, his involvement with Hoffa in the years leading up to the disappearance places him at the heart of the story. By the mid-1970s, Hoffa had become a major problem for the Mafia. After serving time in prison for jury tampering, fraud, and bribery, he was released in 1971 under the condition that he would not attempt to regain control of the Teamsters Union. However, Hoffa, never one to back down from a fight, openly defied this restriction. He launched a campaign to reclaim his presidency, challenging the new leadership that was handpicked by the Mafia. The Mafia had no intention of letting Hoffa return to power. The Teamsters Union had become a cash machine for organized crime, allowing them to finance casinos, loan sharking, and other illegal activities using the union's pension fund. Hoffa's return threatened to disrupt this arrangement. He was outspoken, unpredictable, and increasingly desperate to regain his influence. Worst of all, he hinted that he would expose the Mafia's control over the union if they didn't support his comeback. As Hoffa made enemies within both the labor movement and the criminal underworld, pressure mounted for him to be silenced. Russell Bufalino, the powerful Mafia boss who had once been Hoffa's ally, now saw him as a liability. The decision was made. Hoffa had to go. On July 30th, 1975, Hoffa was last seen outside the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. He was reportedly there to meet with Mafia associates Anthony, Tony Provenzano, and Anthony, Tony Giacalone to discuss his return to power. However, both men later denied any involvement, and no definitive proof has ever surfaced confirming they were there that day. Sheeran, in his later years, confessed that he was the one who carried out Hoffa's execution. According to his version of events, he was ordered by Bufalino to handle the job personally. Sheeran claimed that Hoffa had trusted him completely, which is why Hoffa willingly got into a car with him that fateful afternoon. Hoffa, believing Sheeran to be his loyal friend, did not suspect that he was being led to his death. Sheeran stated that he drove Hoffa to a house in Detroit, where he shot him twice in the back of the head. According to Sheeran, Hoffa's body was then quickly disposed of, though he never revealed exactly where. Some theories suggest that Hoffa's remains were cremated, while others claim his body was buried in a secret location, possibly beneath the foundations of a building or even in a New Jersey landfill. The FBI launched an extensive investigation, interviewing hundreds of witnesses and following countless leads, but Hoffa's body was never found. Over the years, numerous theories emerged, ranging from Hoffa being buried beneath Giant Stadium to his body being dissolved in acid. None of these theories have been proven, and to this day, Hoffa's fate remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American crime history. Sheeran's confession, detailed in the book I Heard You Paint Houses, became one of the most widely accepted accounts of what happened to Hoffa. However, some experts remain skeptical. They argue that Sheeran, in his old age, may have exaggerated or taken credit for Hoffa's murder to solidify his legacy. Some believe other mafia hitmen were involved or that Sheeran was simply a decoy, used to lure Hoffa into a trap before others carried out the hit. Regardless of whether Sheeran's confession was entirely truthful, his deep ties to both Hoffa and the mafia make it likely that he had knowledge of the events that led to Hoffa's disappearance. The mystery continues to fascinate historians, journalists, and law enforcement, keeping Hoffa's name alive decades after he vanished without a trace. Frank Sheeran's confession about Jimmy Hoffa's murder became widely known through the 2004 book I Heard You Paint Houses, written by Charles Brandt. The book is based on extensive interviews with Sheeran in the final years of his life, during which he revealed details about his role in organized crime, his close friendship with Hoffa, and his alleged involvement in Hoffa's disappearance. The title itself, I Heard You Paint Houses, is a coded phrase used in the mafia, meaning, I hear you're a hitman. The paint refers to the blood that splatters on the walls after a killing. The book's impact was enormous, as it presented Sheeran's detailed account of one of America's greatest crime mysteries. Before its publication, Hoffa's disappearance had been the subject of countless theories, but no one had ever come forward with such a specific and personal confession. Sheeran's account added a new dimension to the case, suggesting that Hoffa's murder was not just a mafia hit, but a betrayal carried out by one of his closest friends. According to Sheeran, the events leading up to Hoffa's murder were carefully orchestrated by the highest levels of the mafia. Russell Bufalino, the boss of the Bufalino crime family and a powerful figure in the underworld, allegedly ordered Sheeran to carry out the hit. This was not just a simple assassination. It was a strategic move to eliminate a dangerous liability. The mafia feared that Hoffa's growing desperation to regain power in the Teamsters would lead him to expose their criminal dealings. He had become unpredictable, and in the world of organized crime, unpredictability was a death sentence. Sheeran's confession was shocking because of the level of detail he provided. He claimed that he personally lured Hoffa into a car under the pretense of a meeting and drove him to a house in Detroit. Inside the house, Hoffa was expecting to meet mafia leaders to discuss his return to power. Instead, Sheeran shot him twice in the back of the head. Sheeran described the moment as deeply emotional, as he had a strong personal bond with Hoffa. However, he claimed that in the mafia, when an order was given, personal feelings had no place. He simply did what he had been told. The book also explored Sheeran's life beyond Hoffa's murder, detailing his role in other mafia activities. He admitted to being involved in multiple hits for the Bufalino crime family and described how his military background made him an efficient killer. His stories painted a dark picture of the mafia's control over unions, politics, and even American history. One of the most controversial aspects of I Heard You Paint Houses is its reliability. While Sheeran's confession provides a compelling and dramatic narrative, some law enforcement officials and crime historians question whether he was truly responsible for Hoffa's murder or if he was exaggerating his role. Critics argue that Sheeran may have taken credit for Hoffa's killing to secure his legacy as a feared mafia enforcer. Others believe that while Sheeran may have been involved, the actual murder may have been carried out by other hitmen under mafia orders. Despite the doubts, the book gained significant attention and eventually became the basis for Martin Scorsese's 2019 film The Irishman, starring Robert De Niro as Sheeran, Al Pacino as Hoffa, and Joe Pesci as Russell Bufalino. The film brought Sheeran's story to a global audience, reigniting interest in Hoffa's disappearance and the dark world of organized crime. Whether Sheeran's confession is fully accurate or not, I Heard You Paint Houses remains one of the most detailed and chilling accounts of the Mafia's influence over American history. The book not only tells the story of a hitman, but also exposes the deep ties between crime, politics, and labor unions in the mid-20th century. Sheeran's words, whether truthful or embellished, have become a defining part of the Jimmy Hoffa mystery. Frank Sheeran's legacy is one of violence, betrayal, and mystery. He lived a life shaped by war, crime, and loyalty to dangerous men, yet in his final years, he seemed to carry the weight of his past. From his early days as a soldier in World War II to his rise as a trusted mafia enforcer, Sheeran's story is a chilling reflection of how power, corruption, and violence were deeply intertwined in 20th century America. His connections to the mafia, his friendship with Jimmy Hoffa, and his alleged role in one of the greatest unsolved crimes in U.S. history made him a figure of both intrigue and infamy. Despite never being a made man, due to his Irish heritage, Sheeran was one of the most trusted non-Italian associates in the mafia. His work with the Bufalino crime family, his role in enforcing the Teamsters' interests, and his willingness to carry out violent tasks made him indispensable to the underworld. He was involved in numerous high-profile activities, including labor racketeering, extortion, and contract killings. But his name will forever be tied to one event above all others: the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. For decades, the question of what happened to Hoffa remained unanswered, fueling conspiracy theories, FBI investigations, and endless speculation. Sheeran's confession in I Heard You Paint Houses provided what seemed like a definitive answer, yet doubts remain. His claim that he personally shot Hoffa in a Detroit house was detailed and chilling, but some experts question whether he truly acted alone or if he was just a small piece of a larger, more complex operation. Regardless of whether his confession was entirely accurate, Sheeran's life represented the brutal reality of the mafia world. He was a man who followed orders without hesitation, who lived by the unwritten code of silence, and who understood that in the underworld, trust was always conditional. He had once been Hoffa's most trusted friend, but when the order came down from above, that friendship meant nothing. In his later years, Sheeran's health declined, and he seemed to reflect more on the choices he had made. He spent his final days in a nursing home, cut off from the world that had once feared and respected him. He outlived many of the men he had worked with, including Russell Bufalino, Jimmy Hoffa, and countless other mobsters and union leaders who had shaped his life. Perhaps haunted by his past, Sheeran became more open about his involvement in crimes that had long been shrouded in secrecy. Even after his death in 2003, Sheeran's legacy continues to be debated. Some see him as a ruthless hitman, a man who killed without remorse and followed the mafia's orders without question. Others view him as a tragic figure, a soldier who never truly left the battlefield, caught in a world where survival meant loyalty to men who would one day betray him just as he betrayed others. His story serves as a reminder of the blurred lines between loyalty and treachery, power and corruption, friendship and duty. Whether he was truly responsible for Hoffa's murder or simply claimed credit for it, his name will forever be linked to one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Frank Sheeran might have spent much of his life in the shadows of organized crime, but in the years following his death, his story became one of the most widely discussed and debated tales of the mafia world. From books to movies, Sheeran's name is now synonymous with the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, the inner workings of the mafia, and the violent history of labor unions in America. His story, once confined to FBI files and whispers within the criminal underworld, has since been immortalized in literature, documentaries, and Hollywood films. The most significant factor in Sheeran's rise to public awareness was the publication of I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt in 2004. This book, based on extensive interviews with Sheeran before his death, provided a first-person confession of his involvement in Hoffa's disappearance. While many historians and law enforcement officials remain skeptical of the book's claims, It became an instant sensation among crime buffs and those fascinated by mafia history. Brandt's book not only detailed Sheeran's relationship with Hoffa, but also painted a larger picture of how organized crime operated in the mid-20th century, showing how labor unions, politicians, and the mafia were often deeply intertwined. However, it was Martin Scorsese's 2019 film The Irishman that truly cemented Sheeran's place in popular culture. The film, based on I Heard You Paint Houses, featured Robert De Niro as Sheeran, Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa, and Joe Pesci as Russell Bufalino. With such an all-star cast and Scorsese's legendary storytelling, the movie brought Sheeran's story to a global audience. The Irishman was unique in its approach. It wasn't just a gangster film. It was a reflective, slow-burning exploration of power, loyalty, and regret. The film depicted Sheeran's journey from a war veteran to a trusted mafia hitman, and finally, to an old man grappling with the weight of his actions. The movie didn't just show the violence of the mafia world. It also highlighted the loneliness and isolation that came with a life of crime. One of the most striking elements of The Irishman was its portrayal of Sheeran's role in Hoffa's disappearance. The film depicted the moment when Sheeran, under orders from Russell Bufalino, was forced to betray his closest friend. It was a deeply emotional and chilling scene, showing Hoffa's shock and disbelief as he realized he had been set up. The film's depiction of this moment was heavily influenced by Sheeran's own account from I Heard You Paint Houses, though the true details of Hoffa's fate remain uncertain. Beyond the book and the film, Sheeran's story has inspired countless documentaries, podcasts, and discussions in the true crime community. His life serves as a case study of how organized crime operated in America during the 20th century, offering insight into the secretive world of mafia politics, labor union corruption, and the violent consequences of disloyalty. Sheeran's portrayal in The Irishman also sparked debate about the reliability of his confession. Some critics argue that the film and book romanticize Sheeran's life, and that he may have exaggerated his role in Hoffa's disappearance. Others believe that while Sheeran may not have pulled the trigger himself, he was certainly involved in the planning and execution of Hoffa's murder. Regardless of whether every detail of Sheeran's story is true, his name has now been cemented in history. He is no longer just a footnote in the mafia's history, but a central figure in one of its greatest mysteries. His story, filled with power, betrayal, and regret, continues to captivate audiences and will likely remain a topic of fascination for years to come. Frank Sheeran's life was a testament to the brutal realities of organized crime, a world where loyalty was fleeting, friendships could turn deadly, and power came at the cost of one's soul. From his time as a war veteran to his years as a feared mafia enforcer, Sheeran lived by the code of obedience and violence, but in the end, he was left with nothing but regrets. His alleged role in Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance remains one of the most debated mysteries in American history. Whether his confession was entirely true or an exaggeration, there is no doubt that he was deeply entangled in the events that led to Hoffa's fate. His story, immortalized in books and films, offers a chilling glimpse into the dark alliances between the mafia and the labor unions, an era where corruption and crime shaped the nation's power structures. Yet, despite all the notoriety, Sheeran died alone, haunted by his past. His legacy is not one of triumph, but of betrayal and isolation. He outlived most of the men he once served, only to spend his final years reflecting on the choices that had defined his life. In the end, Frank Sheeran was not just the Irishman. He was a man who had painted too many houses, followed too many orders, and found himself lost in a world where trust was an illusion and redemption was out of reach.